The After the Affair podcast with me, Luke Shillings, is here to help you process, decide, and move forward on purpose following infidelity. Together, we'll explore what's required to rebuild trust not only in yourself, but also with others. Whether you stay or leave, I can help. And no matter what your story, there will be something here for you. Let's go. Episode 10. I cannot believe it's episode 10 already. Amazing. So welcome to the After the Affair podcast with myself, Luke Shillings, episode number 10. As we progress through this podcast journey together, I'd like to start bringing guests on to share their expertise or sometimes simply share their story. Something that I think will be really useful to anybody going through infidelity. Today is the first part of that journey where I have a conversation with people who are living it, people who are experiencing it just like myself and like many of those listening. So, in this first of the interview episodes, I'm speaking with Mike, who has courageously come onto the show to share his story. Mike, like many of those listening, has not had a clear path through infidelity. Often there are forks in the road and you must follow a different path. Sometimes you think you have things under control and you know where you are heading, and then something unexpected happens which completely changes your journey. Mike's story is a tale of two halves, so without further ado, let's jump in. Okay, well, thank you for being here, Mike. It's great to have you on the podcast, and I'm sure that our listeners will have and be able to learn plenty from our conversation today. So let's start by learning a little bit about you and why you're here.
Sure, yeah. Kind of in the club that no one wants to be in, but so 17 years ago, my wife had an affair with her coworker at the time, and this is in kind of like a corporate environment. And the thing of it was also that I actually worked there as well. So I wasn't in the same department with them, but it was close by. So all of this kind of happened, at work. So, I mean, just to, I guess, run through the whole kind of story.
Yeah, sure.
I married my wife in 2003. I think we've been together for about 4 years prior to that. I think we were both I met her pretty young, like in college. I was in my early 20s. She's great. I mean, fantastic person, fantastic memories of those early years. And, we kind of got married. Well, we did get married in 2005. And kind of embarked on our life together, and basically kind of this is right after she graduated from college. I was already working at this company. This was kind of a rough stage of her life because she didn't really immediately get a job right after college. That really kind of affected her self-esteem, I think. And also, it has to be said, she has hereditary depression, like just on her side of the family. So it was kind of a rough phase of our, relationship, in that she just found it incredibly difficult to get a job. She had a master's degree in finance, but basically yet no companies wanted to hire her because she had no previous experience, right? So that kind of gave her kind of a dent to her self-esteem. And there was really, I kind of have, my hands were tied because, I can't just give her a job. But, I think we moved, to an area that we felt would be better, for her to find a job, but we were still having no luck. And it was several months of that. She had, been very, very depressed, feeling isolated, basically at home all day, while I'm going to work. And fortunately, our company had this employee referral program, and I was able to kind of refer her, and they kind of give you a leg up if you're referred. And she actually ended up landing the job, And at that point, I was like really, really hopeful that this would kind of bring her out of her depression. And it was nice that, we're at the same company, so we could kind of drive together and go home together and, all that stuff. So yeah, she started working at this company. And, I think the same day she was hired, they hired her coworker, which is the future affair partner. And this guy sat like right next to her, right? So they were pretty much going to be working very closely together, just through their same department, just like what they're doing was the same. So, I think I was introduced to him. She actually had told me in the early days that she found him annoying. It literally didn't register whatsoever that it would even be possible for her to have an affair. And literally this thought like never entered my mind. Like, I think, when you haven't been affected by this, it's like, oh, that won't happen to me, right? It's never going to happen to me. No, it just doesn't even cross your mind. So my defenses were not up like whatsoever. And so the other thing that was going on at the time was I had this outside hobby. So I used to race motorcycles, not professionally, but at kind of an amateur level. But it was really something that I enjoyed doing. I was never really good at any kind of team sports or anything, and this seemed to be something that I was, fairly decent at, and I kind of just been really enjoying that and getting some recognition for that. And I was on like a team, and I would get free parts and stuff. So it was just a fun thing that ended up, becoming more and more, gradually. So I was spending some time, going off on the weekends here and there to do this racing. And I think how this kind of all started was so the coworker, the guy, and my wife, they both just and my wife was like naturally just a friendly, outgoing, trusting, empathetic person, right? So
Yeah.
she's not like the kind of person that is like this cold, like, shuts you down, like this only talk about business type, right? So at the time, probably should have mentioned this before, we were each other's first relationship.
Oh, okay.
So that's kind of major factor in kind of her not even realizing, this, even the concept of boundaries, right? And I don't really think she was thinking herself like, let me get into this, emotional attachment to this guy, right? It just kind of, both of them just throughout the course of their work would just, be kind of flirty. I think it was mostly initiated by the guy. They would kind of gossip about their boss together, kind of mutual shared thing that they had. And I think just eventually it just started getting, oh, what are you doing this weekend, right? And she'd be like, oh, my husband is going off racing, And I think this guy had a big history with women. I think he had, dated a lot. He had a girlfriend at the time, but just kind of went through a lot of casual relationships. And he kind of just sort of, fell for my wife, I guess, or just kind of decided to himself, I kind of like this, like I don't care if she's married, right? So he kind of just started probing, and they were, I think it just got to the point where he would say like, oh, I can't believe your husband would leave you alone, this weekend, let's maybe hang out or something, right? And it started out as this sort of, friendship, quote unquote, and just kind of gradually, over, the course of the next 2-3 months, just became a little bit more and more inappropriate, right? So like if I had known about some of this, I probably would have felt very uncomfortable, but none of this was really communicated to me whatsoever. So it just kind of continued on. And at one point they were assigned on a business trip together. So they both where they flew out to meet some people and talk about business, and that's kind of where the affair kind of reached the next level. It kind of became physical, not like all the way there, but that's kind of where she was like, oh, this is kind of I shouldn't have done that, right? And this is I basically am being unfaithful at that point.
So this is a place where there was a recognition that a boundary had been crossed.
Oh yeah,
up until that. Yeah.
So yeah.
I think it's interesting that you'd mentioned that you never imagined even having thoughts that there was a possibility that your partner could be unfaithful. And I think it's also quite likely, and it's certainly what I see amongst people I talk to and some of my other clients, is that actually the unfaithful partners also never imagined that happening either.
Right.
Like it wasn't a thought that ever entered their mind. And just like you described in your situation there, which thanks ever so much for sharing that it just something that sort of builds and builds slowly over time, and it's not a case of going from here to there overnight. It's a much more gradual process.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I liken it to the toad in the pot of water that just gradually gets hotter and hotter, and before you know it, it's boiling. So
exactly.
Yeah.
Perfect. So after this boundary had been crossed, you obviously already mentioned that this was 17 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Is that right? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And you are still with your wife now?
Yes.
Mm-hmm. So why did you choose to stay once you'd sort of discovered what was going on?
Yeah, it had gone on for several months after that business trip. It escalated to a full-blown physical affair, and then I had obviously no idea. She was acting distant, and I was like trying to figure out why. She confessed, right? So initially, my reaction was, I think it was just fear of being abandoned, and just not accepting what was happening to me. I thought, something may be going on, something wasn't right. She had moved out to quote unquote, find herself, or some other similar reason that I just didn't understand, and I had confronted, I'd be like, are you having an affair? Right? No, you're, kind of like gaslighting me, right? Like, you're crazy. But I think it was initially just fear of being abandoned, not really willing to accept what was going on. But then also I wanted, I think, to prove her and her, affair partner wrong, because it was so weird. She literally thought that I wouldn't care. Like, she thought that I would maybe be mad for a few weeks and then get over it and be like her friend. Like, it was like this Stockholm syndrome thing. So I think that's the other reason. Was like, no, you are incorrect. And, I'm willing to kind of, work towards reconciling, but you need to cut it, you need to basically go no contact. I mean, that's really not entirely possible with the situation, but I was like, you need to quit, he needs to quit, something needs to change. But it was just so like maddening, that she had just so like misread me. And I just wanted to prove her wrong. And I it's just, I love her. So I really knew her not to be the type of person that this was like a serial cheater kind of thing. Like, she's never like a partier. It just felt like something that was very situational, and like, you made a mistake. And, I mean, as grave as that mistake was, I didn't feel like it was something that I was willing to walk out for, and just leave her. I was so emotionally invested in her that it was like, I feel like I can, I can get over this, and I think we can get over this. So that was,
So once you'd had discovered obviously what was going on, and you made this choice to stay, like you say, and it came from a place of fear, I think you said, and to an extent almost to try and sort of prove to your wife and the affair partner that you weren't just going to stand for this, and this wasn't just a case of you bowing down and walking away from the situation.
Right. Yeah.
Once you did that, I mean, how did many other people know about this, and what were their opinions, and how did you deal with the opinions of the other people?
Yeah. So I went to my mom first. My mom and I are pretty close. My dad, actually, he passed away, fortunately, but my mom remarried. And so I went to her and her husband first. And obviously my mom was very like sympathetic to what was going on, extremely angry at my wife for that betrayal and putting her son through this, right? And she wanted me to leave. But my mom's also just a very supportive person of what I want to do. So she was like, I'll kind of have your back, whatever way you want to go with this. But honestly, like this just like is too much. I feel like, you need to kind of save your dignity, or, she needs to have consequences, right? And I totally get that. And also her husband was kind of like, you need to, find someone better. And people just kind of like your support system, they don't want to see you get hurt, right? So their natural instinct, I think, is always going to be to, try to prevent that from happening again. And the most obvious way that they can see is just to get rid of the source, right? And I told her, like, that didn't really feel right to me if, my wife was open to reconciliation. I also kind of let her family know exactly what was going on, because I kind of saw them as a support system to try to talk some sense into her. And they really liked me, and they did not like, I don't think they had met the fair partner ever, but just from what had been described, I mean, nobody liked him. So her family was supportive of us reconciling, versus my family was kind of not so much, but yet they were going to be like supportive. My friends, I think they kind of, were like, yeah, you should kind of, kick her to the curb or whatever. Same thing as, they just want to protect me. But it just didn't feel right to me. So it was kind of just, at the end of the day, not something I was going to let other people decide for me. So yeah, it's pretty much how they reacted.
And again, I think that's something that gets seen quite often in many situations. It's something that even I can relate to quite closely. My family and friends definitely were all about wanting to protect me from further harm, from future harm. And of course, the simplest way to do that is just to remove the problem, rather than face it or try and fix it or try and resolve the situation. Also not dissimilar from the my wife's side. I had a good relationship with her family, and of course I think they would have preferred the relationship to have been successful going forward. And I can imagine that a lot of people listening can relate to that as well. So once you'd made that decision and you'd sort of started to move on, you'd been talking about it with your mother, you were saying, and obviously some other people were becoming more and more aware of it. And as time went by, did you feel that you had healed from what had happened?
Yeah, I did. There was kind of, after the discovery and the admission, we went through probably the toughest 2 or 3 months of my life, where she was kind of ambiguous about who she wanted to go with. I guess that was like pure torture emotionally, right? And just to have everything kind of right in front of my face was an additional factor. But the thing that needed to happen was, her to be removed from this guy, because she was still sitting right there. And so, after, and we'll get to this, a little later, but he was basically fired. And after that happened, that's when the healing actually started. It kind of, my initial feeling was just thank God that, A, this guy's gone, and B, my wife seems to like have made a definite decision, right? He had kind of moved on to his next serious girlfriend. And so he kind of like, I was like, good, forget about my wife, right? And so she kind of accepted that it had ended, and that's when healing actually started. And to be honest, just my overwhelming emotion was just kind of like to be grateful that I had this opportunity to reconcile, and it wasn't this like, let me go run off with this guy, right? And she was like, I choose you. I'm an idiot. I want to do whatever it takes to make this up to you. I was like, I was just grateful. So I don't know if I was really even thinking about my own healing. Definitely was, went through some periods of, anger, and a lot of shame and stuff. Yeah, it was, it got started after, he had left. And, I think there was some hypervigilance definitely for the next year to two. I mean, I'd answered the phone a few times, and be like a male, person from like, who is this? Right. I was like, kind of for a while there, it was probably not that great, but I mean, that's kind of to be expected.
So,
Yeah.
were there any particular things that you did actively to try and heal through that process once you decided to try and make it a go together?
Yeah, I mean the obvious thing, like I think everybody sort of does, is let's do couples therapy. So for at least 2, 3, 4 months there, we were going to couples therapy, working through it, just rebuilding kind of the relation, rebuilding the marriage. So it was I had a pretty serious motorcycle crash in the weeks prior to finding out. So I was like kind of had to, rethink my priorities. So just that was another thing, just focusing on the marriage and strengthening the relationship and addressing, identifying the causes and then trying to address those causes. So, I think a lot of people may relate to like their spouse kind of blaming them for some aspect of their personality or whatever, or what they were doing, and we needed to really kind of figure that out. What actually were the factors in this, and then address those. So we definitely worked on that. And the next year or two actually it's kind of was like a renaissance of our marriage, because just so many things improved after that.
Oh, that sounds really good. And you're absolutely right. It's one of those things where one of the first things that you can really do to try and move through these kind of situations is to separate the facts from the things that your brain is telling you is happening. Really sort of, because you can only control a limited number of things.
Mm-hmm.
And there are many things that happen to us in life that unfortunately we just don't get to control. And so aimlessly trying to manipulate them, change them, hope or wish that they will improve in some way, is a pretty fruitless exercise. So being able to separate those things out to help you move forwards, a very positive step for definite. Okay, so what about more recently? Because obviously a number of years have passed now. Where are you at the moment?
Yeah, this really wasn't anything that crossed my mind too much, honestly, for about 15 years. So, I mean, the first year or two, I mean, it was definitely more kind of on my mind, but I was able to get the feeling that I could trust her again after, about a year or so. And really it didn't really factor too much. But over the years, our kind of marriage has waxed and waned in terms of our intimacy levels and our being connected. And recently, maybe about a year ago, and this has probably been going on for a while, but I just started to sort of really notice like this sort of just, I felt like a lack of spark, right? Just like there wasn't that like passion that I was, hoping for, and I just wanted that, I kind of just felt like we could have a better relationship.
So what changed? What changed for you?
it was just a general feeling like my wife wasn't really being very affectionate. She was working a lot more. She's got her own business that she's really working hard at. I just got this feeling like we're not, we're missing something. I don't know what it was. It's just kind of this, I don't know, midlife or something. But I ended up, I saw this mini series on HBO. It's called Scenes from a Marriage. I don't know why I watched this, but I watched it in private because I felt awkward watching it with her. Anything related to affairs, I just feel kind of awkward, like, turn it off, right? But in private, I kind of just there's something about this, that infidelity stuff, that maybe it's like an insecurity thing where I want to watch it, right? So I watched this thing, and it was really kind of triggering. It was about a guy that gets cheated on by his wife, and that really kind of made me feel insecure, and I think want to sort of take steps to improve our marriage. And I told my wife, I'm like, I feel like watch this mini series and I'm feeling kind of insecure. And I also feel like our marriage is sort of not like where it could be. And I know you've always kind of expressed this desire that I'm more, I guess, for lack of a better word, touchy feely, because I'm definitely not that type of person, but she likes that. But I kind of, I was like, I can change, right? But it just kind of feels weird to just change all of a sudden without like notifying the person, because then they're like, what's going on, right? So we had this conversation. I was like, can we be more, like, I'm going to try to be more, I guess, touchy feely. Is that okay? And she, I don't want you to think it's weird. And she's like, God, man, I would love that, right? So we started doing more of that. And one of the other factors was, I told her, I was like, I think one of the reasons why maybe I have this block is because there's some latent resentment about your affair. And maybe if we talk about it, we can kind of close that more for me, or like have more closure, because we're looking at it from a long distance, and it'll be different this time. We're not as charged emotionally, and so on and so forth. So and it's also from, this insecurity. It was almost like I went right back to right after her affair. And it was like I had created this long list of questions to ask her about it. And that was just, we did that. And I don't think that was helpful.
Did it shock
Looking
her?
back, I told her I wanted to ask these, and it was like, I want to do this because I think it will actually improve our relationship. So she was like open to it. I think she was a little wary, probably, obviously uncomfortable, but yeah, that kind of led to the next thing, and things just kind of snowballed kind of from there.
So what is it that you're struggling with most? I mean, you mentioned that you've been stockpiling these questions for the last
Mm-hmm.
probably the
Mm-hmm.
last 17 years, certainly 15 of the 17 years. And do you think that's something that's been gradually going on all the time, or is that something that you just shut the door to 15 years
Mm-hmm.
ago, pretended it wasn't there,
Mm-hmm.
and then
Yeah.
this show that you saw
Right.
has almost been the key that's unlocked that door?
Yeah. Yeah. I wasn't thinking of any questions during those 15 years. There has been, slight, sort of the background thought, to
Yeah.
it over that time, but nothing really to cause it to be, brought to the surface. So yeah, this kind of, desire to ask her these questions, and I hadn't been thinking of these questions, right? Like it just, but at this point, I was like, I kind of want to just double check that I know all the details correctly.
Yeah.
And there's this fear that maybe I didn't know everything.
Had
So
anything
that,
else
yeah.
had anything else changed around a similar time? Was there anything different in your sort of work, or your with your children, or or any other lifestyle thing with your business, anything else that sort of, or was it really just, do you think, this trigger from the show that kind of set the ball
Yeah,
rolling?
I think it was really just this show that triggered it, and this kind of, mistaken thought that like talking about it more would like make our relationship better. And I'm not saying that's not the case with some people, but I think for me it wasn't really the greatest idea. It just brought up a bunch of painful memories. But yeah, I don't really know what. Yeah, I think it really was the
Yeah.
show. Yeah.
So how has it affected other things in your life? Has it affected your family beyond
Oh,
yourself and your wife, with your kids or anything like that? Or?
yeah. So we did have our first child like a couple of years after the affair, and we now have three. So they're kind of in sort of elementary, middle school. They definitely have picked up on something going on. And actually, my wife did tell our older daughters in kind of like a
Okay.
surface way. They kind of know what's happening because they're like, what's you guys are fighting and acting strangely and what's going on, right? So definitely, it's affected the kids in kind of that sense, and they're obviously worried um, that mom and dad are having this issue, and what does that mean. Also, it's really affected my work because it's hard for me to concentrate with it's kind of this whole thing sort of triggered intrusive thoughts, compulsions to go on online forums, post things, ask questions, how are people getting over this kind of thing. And meanwhile, it's just like I'm not working, right? And
Sure.
my situation is I work from home. I'm my own boss. It is important that I do my job, but it's like I do have it's like this sort of flexibility if I want to focus on the wrong thing.
I
So
can
it's
relate to that.
yeah, it's affected that for sure. And then just like my overall stress and anxiety levels. So that kind of went way up.
And
So yeah.
have you been doing anything differently to try and help cope with that, or anything to sort of try and get through that this time around?
Yeah, I've been, I mentioned the online forums, and those are kind of like a double-edged sword. I think if your goal is reconciliation, you definitely don't want to go on kind of like the general purpose infidelity forums or
Mhm.
just the general purpose relationship forum, because I
There's a
think
lot of
there's just
emotion there.
oh yeah, and most of them are not supportive of reconciliation. So I definitely did go. I figured that out in the early days. I was like, I'm not posting here again, right? And I sought out supportive forums of people that whose goal was to reconcile.
Yes.
So that was key, because when you go off to these other forums, you just get shamed, and it's like you just feel like a piece of crap after. You're like, you made the wrong decision, like alpha man wouldn't have done, so on and so forth. It just doesn't make you feel good. I mean, that was a real setback, I think, in the early months.
Yeah.
Is just like you come away with all these things and you bring it home, and then it's like turns into anger at my spouse. So but then later I did figure out the better forums, and even those kind of here and there, I don't think were beneficial, because they would lead me to think about certain questions, and then I would kind of sit with those. But it was helpful. So I'd say the forums, but sort of the reconciliation based ones. And then I sought out a couple like different therapists, because I just kind of wanted to see if I could find a therapist that really kind of clicked for me. And I kind of just lined up two or three therapy. I didn't go back to the first one. I ended up staying with the second two, alternating.
I see. Yeah.
Maybe, yeah. So that you got to kind of try on some different therapists, and see how those sort of work. And I think one of them really helped me out. more so than any of the other ones. So yeah, that's another thing.
So you mentioned that your approach this time, with hindsight, was maybe not the best. It didn't get you the best results in terms of how to move forward. With that in mind now, is there something that you would have done differently, or what does the future look like from this point onwards for Mike?
Yeah, I don't know. I definitely don't think I should have just gone asking her a bunch of questions again, because it doesn't, at the end of the day, I mean, our life is good right now. She's not the same person as she was 17 years ago. There's really no, I mean, even if, I figured out some little fat disturbing new thing, right? Oh, you lied about that. I mean, it just doesn't really affect the current day. And it's, like, what am I going to be like? Oh, you lied about this, so I'm going to blow up our whole marriage 17 years later with 3 kids. It just doesn't make sense. And I don't, I was mistaken in thinking that just going out with all these questions would help anything. It just made it worse. It just brought up memories and feelings that sort of just snowballed. So I don't think I actually just wouldn't have brought it up. I would have tried to self-soothe, which is kind of where I am now, because it really just led to this just kind of sort of weird addiction with consuming this infidelity related content every single place I could find it. And it's just, it's hard for that not to come out and sort of disrupt your relationship, right?
It's easy to draw parallels.
Right. So I don't think I would have done that to begin with, because it just fueled just a whole lot of what if thinking and just do I really know the whole story, and it was not if I had to do it again, I would have not sort of
that approach.
Yeah,
I think as well, when you have these thoughts running through your mind, and they start to become embedded in that way, and then you just seek evidence to try and support them, and you can trick yourself into thinking you're wanting the answers, but all you're actually doing is trying to reinforce them in some way, and of course it just doesn't resolve itself. And it can be a really challenging to overcome.
Yeah, and people put stuff in your mind that you haven't thought about before in these forums. Like,
very true.
I'll post something and they're like, "Oh, well, you're plan B, right?" And then I went off on this whole tangent with her about, like, I feel like I'm plan B for like weeks. That was the issue, right? And it was like a new issue every single time. It was always fueled by someone's comment that I was like, "Oh,
I see,"
and it was just like, no, I'm actually not plan B. Like, she married me to begin with, and this guy was probably plan B way more than I am. But it's like you just kind of convince yourself of these things, and it's just it can be so damaging. Yeah,
absolutely. So what's next for you, Mike? What's the future look like for your journey?
The future, I think, looks pretty bright. I really feel like the past month or two has really, shown signs of coming out of this. It was almost just like another sort of, it's almost just like being right back after the affair. It just takes it, I think maybe a year or so is very common, at least to get over the worst parts of this. And I think just we're kind of seeing this here where I'm sort of coming out of it. I'm learning to self-soothe. I've learned several ways to reframe things, think about things in a different way, look for the positives. So I'm really kind of, I'm seeing this kind of again fading into the background, but hopefully this time with more closure. I definitely felt like, the first time around, I sort of maybe stuffed some things away, right? My goal was just, get her back at all costs, right?
Yeah.
That did work, but some things just were not put away, I don't think, properly. So, I mean, in that sense, this could be, I think, our relationship could actually be better than ever at this point, because I've stuck with, our intimacy is vastly improved versus a year ago. Just our emotional connectedness, her feeling, like I'm attracted to her more. So yeah, I'm very hopeful for the future. And I think we have, something that's can, last for many years to come. Yeah.
Excellent. Well, thank you ever so much for sharing your story, Mike. I'm sure it'll be very useful to many of those people listening. Yeah, I wish all the best for you as well.
All right. Yeah. Thanks, Luke. Good to talk.
I have absolutely no doubt that what we've listened to today will have resonated with many of you. Something I see all too often are situations whereby people go through something like infidelity and they choose to stay, which is an amazing thing to do. It's an amazing thing to have that belief and that hope and that trust in their partner that they can still rebuild their relationship after they've been betrayed. Of course, there's a risk that when diving into something like that, through the fear of loss, through uncertainty, through a belief that it's just the easiest option, or perhaps through lack of understanding that facing your fears and working through all of these things might create something you just never expected. Instead, we tend to just push this stuff away. We don't deal with it and just move on as if, like it's just been forgotten about. Then in the situation like Mike's, 15 years later, it resurfaced in a completely unexpected way. Mike's options now are pretty much the same as they were first time around, but life is what you make of it, and choosing to step outside of his comfort zone with intimacy, to be more open to having conversations like this, will really serve him well, I have absolutely no doubt. If you'd like to share your story on a future episode, then send me a message. Contact details are in the show notes as per usual. That's all for today. Speak to you next week. Take care.